So, obviously sports betting and the sports industry, sports data is something that if you've been involved in industry now over the last 5-10 years, has become such a hot topic. Everywhere you go, everyone's talking about data, analytics, sports betting, the impact of it. Everyone would have seen the liberalisation of the US sports betting market and what that means, and that will probably have a transformational effect on global sports as the American sports market is so big and significant. One thing I wanted to say, and I'm sorry for labouring this point, but I'm extremely proud of the fact that we don't, and I keep echoing this point, and I can tell you why it's really important for this panel, for those of you that may not appreciate this. Oh gosh. That none of the panellists here have paid any money to be on here. We asked international federations to be representative on there for, it's a difficult topic for them to be involved with. So some showed interest, some wanted to speak, couldn't make it because of their availability to speak. We asked the betting industry to partake in this debate. Again, there was interest. The European Sports Betting Association wanted to speak, but they couldn't. Their representatives just couldn't get it out of their diary because they couldn't fit it in their diary. Because they were already committed to other events. But I have received emails, comments, phone calls, both on the record, off the record, from people about this particular topic. It is a hypersensitive issue. But the panellists who are here because, one, they've expressed their interest in sharing information, having open dialogue.
And because everyone else you asked couldn't make it, right?
Yeah, the good people couldn't turn up. So you got this lot. But we'll make do. I think we'll do all right. The worst thing is they were joking around at the beginning going, are you going to do a short intro? And the answer's probably no. But the reason being is it's important to understand this. Like with all the discussions that we've had, I would really appreciate throughout this debate, stroke discussion, for you to ask questions. And I would ask you to put your hands up early if there's anything that we discuss that you don't understand, you'd like clarification on, or anything you've taken a particular point of view. We have got a room full of leading experts in sports law, sports business in this room. So we want to get the views of the panellists. Anyway, so those of you who don't know me, by the way, I'm Sean. I'm the CEO of LawInSport. I wrote the press release. I'll just read it out just to put this into context, and I'll introduce our panellists. And before I do that as well, like with, I got a present from Tom who's just flown in from DAZN. And so if anyone gets out of hand, I used to box. So there'll be some jabs, some right hooks to keep you all in check. So thanks, Tom, for that. But the panellists, these panellists in particular, have changed their diaries, their schedules, flights. David just flown in from Singapore this morning, literally into Heathrow. Matt, you still flying out now, or have you cancelled that completely?
But I'm still going.
Yeah, he literally was like,
later.
Last week he said, oh, by the way, I'm meant to be flying out at 10 o'clock in the morning. I was like, please, God, no.
I didn't want to give you the pain of another rejection.
So, don't know what to say, thanks. Anyway, I'll come back to the issue at hand. So sport has always relied on analytics to improve performance both on and off the pitch. However, technology revolution has exponentially increased the ability of those working in sport to capture, analyse and monetise the data. At the same time, the sports betting industry has become an influential stakeholder in sport through offering wagering products, from fan and consumer engagement, sponsoring sports events, teams, athletes, as well as working in collaboration with law enforcement and integrity teams at international and national governing bodies to fight and combat match fixing and spot fixing, depending if you want to make that sort of variation, but match manipulation, let's call it that. However, questions have been raised about the role and extent to which the sports betting data companies and integrity service providers should operate within and work within sport. For example, you only have to look at the initial findings or initial report of the Tennis Independent Review Panel. I believe the final report's due at some point in the near future. So, our experts on the panel to debate and discuss what role sport should and what relationship sport should have with the sports betting industry. We have Susan Ahern. Susan is a barrister in Ireland. She's a leading sports lawyer. She was the General Counsel of World Rugby. She has been extensively involved in a whole host of issues around integrity, education programs to do with players, to do with competitions. She is also a member of the Core Arbitration for Sport and Sport Resolution UK International Panel. She's a member of the Legal Commission of the IAAF, and she was responsible for implementing the anti-corruption and betting regulations at World Rugby, as well as supporting their education enforcement opportunities. Now, this is where I didn't put my notes in order. To Susan's left, we have David Lampitt, the Managing Director, Group Operations at Sportradar AG. David initially joined the board at Sportradar in August 2012, and is in a non-executive capacity. David has over 15 years of in-depth experience working in the sports industry at senior levels. For those of you that have come to our conference before, he's been one of our speakers. He's got extensive knowledge he's got background as being an executive within football at Portsmouth, supporters direct. He understands the sports industry really well. He's always open to discussions. And Sportradar, obviously, we can find out more about their business model and what they're up to in a second. So I'm not going to go too much into the businesses because I want you guys to kind of explain it. To my left, we have Stephen Burton. Now, Stephen is kind of living the dream in some ways because he went from, I guess some of the people in here all lived in that regard. So he was a private practice lawyer, known and well as a leading figure in sports data at the law firm Couchman's. Then he left to join as a Genius Sports, as a sports director of integrity and governance and sports partnerships. He's now the managing director of Genius Sport, and there's been a really interesting development, obviously, in your business. Again, you can come into that and what that means in the future. I think it'll be relevant to the discussion. As I said, he's recognised as a lead authority on sport and sports data. He's involved with, just to give you some of the cases, and again, you can tell there's a long list. These guys have got impressive CVs, so I'm going to try and keep it short as possible, but he's involved with Football Data Co. Limited, Premier League, English Football, ATP Tour, WTA Tour, the Football Association of Ireland, Liga de Football, the Spanish football, basically. Anyway, so he's got a fantastic CV. I've done interviews, I think, with most of the people on the panel, actually, so you can check those out as well. Then to his left, we have Matt Drew, who is that you're worried about what I'm going to say about you now, aren't you?
No,
I can see you.
I'm just very aware that what you got sent from us was a lot shorter than what Stephen sent you.
Matt is the Executive Vice President for Business Development and a former Director of Integrity and Security at Perform Group. In his role, he's primarily focused on strategic relationships and rights acquisitions, including the groundbreaking deal with FIBA and WTA. Again, we had a lengthy discussion around the US sports betting market and what that means. You can check that out on the LawInSport podcast. Right, to get the ball rolling and to get stuck in quite early, I think. Let's see if I can find my questions. Are betting and data companies the right organisations to provide integrity services to sports organisations? Susan?
You're looking at me.
I am.
Well, I suppose that's helpful. I look at things primarily through an integrity prism. So I think that's a good starting point. I also think you have to look very pragmatically at the marketplace. Who is currently providing monitoring services? Who is capable of providing the management of those services and monitoring the markets? And it is, in fact, the data companies. And therefore, you have to look at what's there, who is there, and whether the services they're providing are fit for purpose. Personally speaking, I mean, I've dealt with one of the companies that are represented on the panel in my professional life and engaged them for the purposes of integrity monitoring. And I think where that's packaged in as part of a whole integrity program, where the sport itself has checks and balances in place, and is not entirely reliant on a third party, then I think it can be a wonderful blend.
Sorry, can you? I'm going to be difficult with this, but
Sure.
What does a whole integrity program look like? So just for people in the room, because the one thing in the integrity space, and sports betting and data, people use these sort of broader phrases, and we don't necessarily get into the specifics. So,
Okay.
just heads up for you guys as well. So
Well, let me give you the example then from the specific programme that was put in place for Rugby World Cup 2015. So you have the regulations in place, that's a given. Then you put in place specific tournament regulations around the behaviours and access to players. On top of that was layered an integrity programme whereby integrity officers were brought in and trained and provided direct education to the teams that were participating in the tournament. All of those players who were involved in the tournament had to have gone through an online education program that had been set up on a worldwide basis and available in, at that time, I think 13 languages. And so the on-the-ground integrity officers then dealt with things like education around what an approach might look like from a potential match fixer and so on. On top of that, then you have layered the monitoring program that a lot of the data companies can provide, whereby they're monitoring the markets, because that's something that sport can't do, with the exception perhaps of those horse racing authorities who may have an in-house capacity. But most sports cannot do that, and so you have to look externally for that. And that's where you engage a company that can monitor the markets and do it, on a worldwide basis as that was a worldwide tournament. But added to that, you look at, well, that's one aspect and they can cover certain markets. Are there other markets that they can't cover that other bodies may be able to assist with? And so, for example, we had an arrangement in place, World Rugby had an arrangement in place with the International Olympic Committee in the utilisation of their IBIS monitoring programme. There will have been some bilateral agreements in the background. And then on top of all of that, you work with the regulator in the country that is the host venue, and the Gambling Commission here in the UK are, they're excellent to deal with. They provide an incredible service to sports because they understand that they're trying to manage integrity, but in the context of a regulated environment that they're responsible for regulating within that territory, but which has a very much a commercial bent to it.
So do you see then from the integrity services you talk about, having access to players, integrity officers, education program monitoring? For you then, are you clearly saying that the betting companies and the data providers shouldn't really be involved in anything else other than monitoring? Is that what you're?
No, I think as a sport you have to do a risk assessment, and you have to be very honest, because integrity to sport is hugely important, and so is your brand. So from my perspective, when I'm looking at it, and I can only speak for myself, but if you're going to engage a company to provide monitoring services, and they happen to also provide data aggregation services, then you have to ask yourself the valid question whether or not you want the same company to provide the two services. And I suppose I draw the analogy with an accountancy firm who provides tax services and audit services. If you're a big enough corporation, a bank, a PLC, normal corporate governance would say you don't take the tax advisory services and the audit services from the same entity. So I think that's the thought process that sports need to bring into the equation, so that you don't expose yourself or you minimize risks and perceived risks, because perception is reality. And when it comes to integrity and it comes to reputation, you have to look at the perception as well as the reality.
I think Susan's right in her assessment there, but I just probably, even before we get there, take a step back. I think the conversation around integrity on data and betting in sport, it's aligned with a kind of wider premise of this theme, I think, for everything we'll talk about, which is we're in the middle of a massive, massive change. And I think the wrong position to kind of adopt, which I think some people sometimes do here, is that we're kind of at an end game where in-play betting, live data and so on is so advanced that we now need to kind of design something which works for now, as things are, and then it's job done. And I think that is absolutely not the case. We're in the middle of a massive, massive change, which is going to I mean, there's a need to constantly evolve what is happening in this space across all elements. And integrity is one of those things that's seen huge developments in recent years. And I think that then takes you on to the next question, which is when you talk about integrity, what do you actually mean? Or integrity services, what do you mean? I think Susan there's talked about two in particular, one being market monitoring, and another being utilising assets that a rights holder has in terms of access to players and building education programs and so on, both of which are fundamental to this. But I think dwelling too much on the monitoring piece is, it's a little bit 2012, quite honestly. Monitoring in this space has a role to play, and it's something which historically data providers have provided, and it's something which has had some value. I think it's perhaps not had the value it might have done. And you'll see in some of the case law, which I'm sure others are probably more qualified to talk about than I, but there are cases where it has been utilised within a sort of limited way alongside other evidence to result in sporting sanctions. But the wider point here, which I think answers the question you're asking about, who should provide integrity services and on what basis, is that there is a range of things which constitutes an integrity service. Monitoring is one, education, building massive intelligence frameworks and databases using all stakeholders. And eventually the end game of this is that if you're involved in sports betting, particularly and data creation and any element of it at all, you have a responsibility to participate in the integrity environment. Now, much as you'd love to create a debate here, I don't think anyone's going to create a debate. No one's going to disagree with that base principle. How you go about meeting that need is probably slightly different. I mean, I think I have a view on certain things that have happened historically here, which I don't think have necessarily been purely focused on the actual integrity of the sport. But I think where we are now is that universally that is the aspiration of folks here. But the bit that is perhaps most relevant to your particular question around what betting monitoring is, for example, is that is a slither of what this piece is. I think all of our organisations, and certainly rights holders now, are aware that the intelligence capability that can be generated by every stakeholder, regulators, betting operators, data providers, rights holders, that entire ecosystem needs to work together to create an environment where we do the best possible job of creating a safe environment for sport. I think that's an incredibly difficult thing to argue with. And then the kind of natural consequence of that is, if you're in the space, if you have an obligation to participate in that environment, then you should be looking to do so as a natural, non-profit, non-commercial, at most cost basis operation in that space. And again, I don't think that's something which at this stage is, was certainly the subject of much less debate than it used to be, because I think everyone is moving in that direction as this market evolves, and as I said, people grow a better understanding about what integrity is in that space. But sorry, I cut you off.
Who wants to?
Well, can I step on that? I do.
It's good. That's what we like.
Yeah.
See, you're wrong. We're gonna have this debate.
You'll be happy as well. You'll be happy as well because I agree with quite a bit of what Matt said, but I don't agree with all of it. And yeah, I think Matt's right. There are things that we will all agree on in terms of, and I completely echo what Susan said in relation to the fact that the approach to integrity is multifaceted. But there are within that some key drivers of a successful integrity approach. And even though Matt might think it's slightly 2012, that's probably only because Perform don't provide monitoring services, and Stephen and we do, and so it's easier to say that. But
other than to the Premier League.
But in reality, not in the same way, Matt, and you know that.
Let's explore it. Let's go. This is the thing. This is to get into.
Let's go there. Let me finish. No, let me finish.
I'm moderating this. David,
I just want to clarify two things.
You can come back to it in a minute, Matt. But the reality is that, and to Susan's point as well, the reality is there is an obligation on. Not an obligation. There is a natural fit between the companies where we work, who have access to data and who provide big data to sports organisations. that enables them to carry out some of these services. So, the reality is the people who are providing most of these services now in this marketplace are sat in front of you on the stage. We all do it in slightly different ways. But specifically on the monitoring part, Sportradar was, last time I was here, in fact, we were very pleased to announce on that exact day the fact that we'd been successful in supporting FIFA on banning their referee, Joseph Lampitt, and ended up in a World Cup qualifying match being replayed because he'd been specifically involved in match fixing. The reality is that monitoring is a really, really critical piece of that puzzle. It is only one piece of that puzzle, but it is a really critical piece of that puzzle. And we realized that, Sportradar realized that, and actually I can't say we because it was before my time, and people far more intelligent than me realized that actually what we had and the resources that we had and the mathematical models that we had developed around the sport enabled us also to use that capability to look at how anomalous movements in the betting market might be identified. And what that has meant over the last 10 years, and these guys have now kind of got involved in that marketplace as well, is that
it was Matt. Matt paid us to do that.
Exactly.
He didn't want you to get in your flow.
He was pocket dialing you, I think. Yeah.
They're listening.
That's good. But the reality is the work that we have done has led directly or indirectly to over 200 sporting sanctions being brought in relation to match fixing, over 25 criminal convictions where that evidence and the evidence that we've provided and the expert testimony that we've provided has led to those outcomes. So, even though it may seem, or Matt may see it as slightly 2012, actually it's a really critical part of that process. And there are, of course, then a whole load of other things that come alongside it, and it isn't the only part. And actually, the joint responsibility is partly with us. It's also with the sports rights holders and the sporting organisations. It is with the betting operators, and it is with the regulators. I think the one thing that we would all agree on, though, is that actually, and it's often forgotten in this debate, is that we all share the same ultimate desire for a clean sport and a clean betting market and a clean outcome. And I think too often the sports and the betting operators are kind of set up against each other as somehow having opposing views, and we are often caught in the middle of that debate. But the reality is that actually they are generally all on the same side. The bookmakers lose real money if matches get fixed. The sports rights holders lose real integrity, perception, reputation, potential sponsorship money, whatever, if the sport gets fixed. We, as the intermediaries in a lot of those relationships, our businesses depend upon the probity of sport and the cleanliness of sport and the probity and cleanliness of the betting market. So we have those aligned interests, and I think that's something that is too often overlooked.
100%. My clarification before was around the 2012 comment. In isolation, it's very 2012. I don't argue for a second.
Maybe your system is 2012, Matt, but ours definitely is not.
The point is, in isolation, I think we would all agree that it is. And the points you make subsequently about it being part of an overall system are huge. My point is that since the formulation of that kind of tool, the world has moved on considerably, and that tool has a fundamental role, and some of the work that you've done in that space as an organisation are fantastic. As you said, we all share the same incentive. My point is now, and I think we would all agree on this, it wasn't a challenge, is that there is much more to it now, and I think there is the biggest issue in integrity at the moment is that people are quite slow to recognise that externally. That's my point, not that, I think your monitoring tool hasn't been any good since 2012.
I think you need to row back even further, because I think that the biggest problem actually is the fact that the vast majority of sports, with some very notable exceptions, don't understand the betting market at all. They don't understand really what betting integrity issues are. They're frightened of the betting market. They're frightened of the integrity issues and the impact that it can have on sport. And in a lot of cases, they lack, in some cases, the will, but mainly the funding to actually address these things. And I think that the companies like ours, right at the moment, are filling the gap. I think that to a large extent we're providing those services, be they education, audit, monitoring services or whatever, because nobody else is doing it. Correct. The funding isn't coming from anywhere to support this. There isn't a lot of leadership. Some sports are absolutely taking the lead, and there's some really great examples of, if you look at, for example, the way that English football has, or UK football has worked together to fund integrity measures right the way across the football. When you go to some of the outliers, some of the other sports, they simply do not understand it, and they don't have the resources to deal with this. So we do fill the gap. I think in reality, it takes numerous stakeholders to actually deliver a proper integrity program. This is one of the reasons why we work with Perform, but I think it has to be about, for English football or UK football, but it has to be about the regulators, it has to be about the players' associations, the sports, the law enforcement, all of that has to come together to deliver an effective program. The problem is it takes coordination and it takes a lot of money. Yeah. And at the moment, that money just isn't coming from anywhere.
So
just Sean, if I may there, I would agree with Stephen on this, and having gone through the exercise for what was at a time a reasonably well-funded major sport, starting out that exercise 10 years ago in terms of there are match-fixing issues. You have the onslaught of the internet and what that was doing for in-game betting and so on. And that, there's been an evolution over a 10-year period. But also, I'm involved in voluntary sports as well. And it's a terrifying prospect to sports who maybe at national level appreciate that there is an issue but don't know what to do about it, maybe are getting no guidance from their international federation. And it's a real dilemma. And so it does come back to the need for a multiplicity of approaches and for all stakeholders to be in the room. And that includes the gambling companies, the betting operators who unfortunately are not here today, but I understand have a huge conference in London over the next couple of days. So, I think everybody needs to be in the room, and there are criminal aspects to this, and there's, some bodies like Interpol are doing great work in terms of education and then dealing with
and LawInSport.
cross-border, and LawInSport on the educational front. I think it's all of the actors playing their part, but ultimately appreciating that some sports are just terrified, and then add that to the lack of resources, you have an issue.
You're right, and the point you make there about the criminal element is exactly right, because when people quite often come to the idea of match fixing, what they focus on is, a greedy athlete, a stupid athlete, somebody who does something. But actually behind a lot of match fixing, spot fixing, is organised crime. That's well-funded, well-organised. And unfortunately, I think that the response to organised crime attacking sport through, it's used for money laundering, used for all sorts of different things, that the approach has been piecemeal, and it just hasn't been as well-funded and as well-organised. And the unorganised crime is very, very good at finding the gaps, and so you will have a top division of a particular sport that will have a fully funded, amazing education programme. But you know what? They won't target that. They'll target the next level down. They'll go to the next country, and they'll find the opportunities. And this is why I think we need a more holistic approach. And I think that to some extent there has been, there's been competition between some of the data operators who provided some of these services. But I agree with Matt. I think that the world is evolving and developing, and over time, I think we'll probably play less of a role. That's my view. I think we'll provide the data, and we may provide the technology, but I think we'll provide less of a role, not because we'll abdicate ourselves from this space, but because other people who are maybe better placed to provide some of those functions will step up. But it's not happening at the moment.
I need to interject. I want to interject for a second here, because I've listened to everyone talk, and I'm going to, I said, I apologise in advance for my behaviour. But, one of the arguments is that there's only a problem because there's betting on sports, right? I know it's a very basic argument, but say, for example, with modern technology, the ability to, whether it is be on the phone to someone when they're in an arena or to stream, that you can only manipulate a market if there's a market to manipulate, right?
You're never going to stop that. You are never going to stop that.
So you don't think okay.
I don't think you're ever going to stop that.
So let's talk about the evolution of the betting market and say, for example, your businesses, right? So evolution of a market would be that the betting companies have undoubtedly, as have most technology companies, sees opportunities where there's a lack of regulation. And that's just a commercial approach, right? You go, right, where can I get the most amount of growth? Well, I'm going to go there because I've got least amount of oversight, great upturn, great uptick for me to invest in here, right? So they'll invest in sponsorship. They'll get the eyeballs, pay for ads. It came up in the ticketing discussion, about companies that they drive demand. And then obviously your businesses, and this is the one thing, again, we want to talk about transparency, I'm still a bit unclear on, where the businesses lie that you're talking about, you have a lesser role. Obviously, as that market evolves, you guys are providing data to the betting industry, and is that right? Correct? And then providing monitoring service.
But the provision of official data, or the provision of data from sports by reputable organisations actually aids integrity. There's this view. I mean, you kind of look at the US and everyone's going, look, there's going to be loads of betting in the US because it's been legalised. There's loads of betting in the US already. It exists. Yeah. The difference is it's unregulated. There's no transparency. It's happening in criminal and legal markets, and there is absolutely no visibility or control. The difference there, the difference with the companies that we bring and that regulated sportsbook bring is an ability to provide visibility, control. Sportsbooks, regulated sportsbooks, know exactly who is placing the bet. They can identify who is placing the bet. They pay it out. When you look at unregulated sportsbooks in various different areas, criminal, illegal operators, they have no idea. There are no limits on the amount that can be staked. There's no idea of who those people are. There's no reporting. There's no ability to have any communication back with sports to identify issues. I remember I was in a conference in the Middle East talking about betting, and I said, well, obviously, for cultural, religious reasons, it's never going to happen, and there's never going to be kind of betting here. And the guy said, well, you kind of go down to the fish market and see the people betting on the weight of the fish, because there is a capacity and a tendency to bet, and people will find the way, and they will either do it through legal, regulated, transparent methods, or they'll find other ways of doing it. And I think that if you want to sort out the issues of match fixing and corruption, then what we need to do is move the criminals out of this area. It's not about betting per se, it's about illegal betting.
I'm going to go back to my point, though. What's the tension, I guess, is the way to phrase it. And look, I agree that you guys and the work that has been done in this space is a positive one. There's things that are going forward that are great, and I think I can see what the approaches that you're taking makes perfect sense as people become more educated and the models become clearer. But is there not a tension? Because I've spoke to everyone, a lot of people in this room, and everyone's basically saying to me, what's the relationship between the data companies and the betting companies? And this is what this debate's about in sport. Is there not a tension between providing data to betting, to organise where there's a commercial interest for you to provide those services to the betting industry, and then also either making money off or providing some add-on service which may be perceived as in business as a loss leader? You're saying that there's no tension there?
I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever, and we will all be completely unified on this because it's a statement of fact. What we do as a data provision into betting makes sport safer, without question. I don't think there's any debate about that. There are other differences in business models as to how people approach the market, which we can talk about separately. I don't think that creates any material risk. But to Stephen's point, in terms of, this goes back to what I said at the very top. The theme here is this is an evolving and maturing market. What our three organisations are trying to do, whether it be in the integrity field, which is, as we talked about before, a small part of this, and one where I suspect increasingly we will work together on it. But in the field, in the basic business model of providing data, which runs the markets, we are making things better. This is the other part of the integrity conversation. There's match manipulation, match integrity, and there's content integrity. Now, the way this market has evolved has been from people going into grounds with a phone trying to get some data out so that people could run betting markets, or someone could try and beat the betting markets, to one now in this journey we're on where there are organisations in this space who work together already with some leagues and some groups of leagues to provide a non-exclusive quality of service coming out. I think there's representatives from some of those leagues here, and it's efficient and it's positive and it makes things safer. Without question.
I absolutely agree. And I think the other question maybe that often gets forgotten is, okay, what's the counterfactual? What happens if our three organisations are not there doing it? What happens? The reality is that people's desire to bet on sport does not depend upon Perform or Genius or Sportradar providing data. That desire exists. As Stephen said, it might be in relation to the weight of a fish on a fish market, but people's desire to bet is there and exists. And history tells us that actually trying to adopt a prohibitive approach to that, and the US is a great example of this, simply hasn't worked. It doesn't. It is not a way to control the market. So therefore, if you accept that, the best way to deal with that, as Matt said, is to provide a secure and well protected and integrity conscious service to that downstream market. And the investment that our companies make, which does differentiate us from many others in that space, is that we invest in that upfront process. So here we're not talking about monitoring the betting markets to see what happens and whether somebody is trying to fix a match. We're talking about controlling the individuals and the processes that are collecting the data in the first place, because trust me, they are also targets for integrity and corruption. And unless you have the sorts of controls that we have built up over a number of years, looking into the backgrounds of those individuals, monitoring every single keystroke that they make, audio monitoring what they're doing in a live environment, GPS monitoring them to see where they are in the world, all of this, the kind of technological back end that supports that enables us to be sure and secure that the data coming out of the front end is valid and can be relied upon. And that's also critical from a sporting perspective.
And I would agree with that. And I think from a sports perspective, it's not just about the integrity aspect either. Data enables you to engage with the fans in a much deeper way than the pure game that's occurring on the pitch. It enables you, by providing rich data around the statistics, it gives that deeper fan engagement. It enables you to commercialize it in a way and package things and provide match trackers and have those sponsored. So we talked earlier about, where does the money come from? Well, that's one of the means. Data is one of a very valuable means of doing that, providing an enhanced service, but off the back of it being transparent, being very clear, and it being, honestly attained.
The IRP report, though, what would you say then to the IRP report, which then obviously has been a lot in the press around low levels in tennis, as an example? Because surely I would agree with you that prohibition doesn't make any sense. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But to the extent in which people have the opportunity, and we hear about targeted ads, there's been companies that work to find people who are primed for betting. These people aren't sitting around going, Joe, I really love to bet right now. Alert goes on their phone and go, oh, great, there's great odds at the moment, and then it addicts them into betting. So where's that balance? Where's that extent? And should it extend? Is there a level in which? So you're saying that, if I've got this right, that because of the holistic approach, so my question was, are betting and data companies the right organisation to provide integrity services in sport? And the answer is, well, yes, if it in the right context, using the right
So yes,
tools.
they are absolutely the right companies to provide certain parts of that, and in fact, they're able to do things that many other companies simply are not able to do. So 100% they are.
So the next point is then, at which point, though, when they're providing these services, or whether they're providing this official, unofficial, whatever data, to what extent do you go down the levels? Is there not a point where do you want people providing great data on 14-year-olds, as an example, playing tennis or playing football, for that matter?
Well, that's where the sport has to do its own analysis, and it can't just rely on the argument that you should do it. It has to really look at itself and say, well, if we allow betting very deep down into our grassroots or at the very low levels, do we have a corresponding program that can manage that? And it's not just about monitoring. It is about the athletes understanding the rules, understanding what they can and can't do around betting, understanding what approaches look like, and so on. So it's important for the sport to do its own risk analysis. And so in the tennis context, they went down to an area where the futures level, where the athletes participating were probably not even making enough money to cover their costs. So you automatically have a scenario where there are vulnerabilities, and I won't put it any more than that, and the report is very comprehensive. But there are vulnerabilities, and where there are vulnerabilities, third parties, match fixers, people who want to manipulate will utilise that. So it's incumbent upon both the sport and their service providers to work to ascertain where that line is and not go below it. Or even do a tester, and just a watch and see to ascertain where it ought to be.
The thing that worries me about this really is this idea that that essentially a sport can just say, no betting. That's it. No betting. I'm going to work with any of these people. I'm not going to have any betting on my sport. I'm just going to stop it. This is very, very difficult to achieve. Takes an awful lot of effort and money, and I don't think ultimately you'll be successful. I also think there's a slight worry about looking at integrity issues in a very narrow context, because if you take, and I'm not going to talk about the tennis report in particular, but when you actually start talking about some of this and some of the vulnerabilities of athletes, athletes become vulnerable for lots of different reasons, but some of this is down to the funding of the sport. So the fact that the sport, that actually isn't sustainable for people to maintain a professional career, which makes them vulnerable. Now, I don't think just because you're not well paid, you're automatically going to fix matches, but it definitely makes you more vulnerable. And so there's education issues that need to be considered here. There is funding issues for the sport, not just for the integrity measures, but actually the pyramid of that sport and how it actually works. And the thing that really worries me about the whole betting debate, and I've had it with lots of sports I spoke to in my previous life, was we're not going to engage with betting. We don't agree with betting, so therefore it doesn't exist. Well, it does exist. The problem is it does exist. Sports don't have the ability to just shut the door and say no betting. They have the ability to bury their head in the sand. They have the ability to pretend it's not going on. It's very, very, very difficult to stop it. Now,
and the reality of that is, of course, that if they do bury their head in the sand, they still have all the risk because the betting is still happening.
Even more so.
They probably have more risk because they don't have any like contractual controls or way of, through an official data arrangement to engage with that market. They still carry all the risk, and they don't have any of the any of the controls, and two, any of the financial benefit that enables them to do anything about it.
It's also understand the way the betting markets work, though, as well, because
do you want to explain it for everyone in the room?
Because to a large extent, there are definitely sports events that people go to bet on. Premier League matches, people want to bet on it. They want to see Arsenal against Man United or whatever, they want to bet on it. But there is a whole tail of sports where people who bet on sports just want to bet. Tennis is incredibly popular for betting. I don't believe that tennis is one of the most, I like tennis, but I don't believe it's one of the most popular sports compared to the amount of betting. People want to bet, and it's a good sport for betting. And because of the way that betting is available on mobile, internet, whatever, they offer worldwide 24/7 betting opportunities. And so sportsbooks have to have events that are available for betting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And some of this, I think that, we, for example, we don't supply official data or data for youth events. We don't think it's the right thing to bet on. There's lots of people that bet on these things. We don't do it. But we think that by working with sports, we can create a broad range of sports events that can be bet on, that have the right checks and balances in place, where we know the integrity of the data that actually that actually work. But the problem is that, if sports just step back and don't engage with this, they'll just be seen as a free-for-all by people who are less reputable. I mean, this is the thing that worries me most, is just the fact that the idea that sports can just decide whether or not to engage with betting. They'll engage with betting. It's really about whether they have any visibility and control over it.
That's the challenge for our businesses and our industry, and where each of the three of us have been very progressive in this field. We talked previously about the kind of ability for us to contribute to the match integrity piece, and we're moving in the right direction on that bit. But where we should be challenging ourselves as an industry are the bits that David was talking about before. How are we going about continually improving the means by which we are delivering data out of an event into operators in such a way that we continue to make the event safer? What parameters are we building around it? What controls are we building around it? What can we do today that we couldn't do yesterday? That's part of the maturation of this business. And I think we need to continually assess that. And we need to be challenged by rights holders and people in the space who are doing these data deals. I think we probably all agree that historically that has not been as much of a focus from a rights holder perspective as maybe even we would have liked it to have been, whereby they've had different parameters of making assessments as to what types of deals they would do. But I think the next phase of this is on the content creation integrity, challenging ourselves to consistently improve that. And I think as we move into kind of US market, that becomes even more relevant. Because there are there's different types of risks for rights holders, as I'm sure you'll agree. One is, the basic premise of we don't want our events to be compromised in any way. And then the second bit is the associated reputational risk. And so much of what you see as integrity issues is, or discussed as integrity issues, is actually just a bit of noise around something where there's no materiality. But that still doesn't help rights holder partners who have to deal with that situation, may struggle on occasions to understand exactly how it all fits together and what it means, and may not be prepared to deal with it in the right way. So I see that again as part of our role as we move to, more and more towards working with rights holders, being able to manage that risk based on the content that we're creating, the data we're creating, and the way in which we're working with our partners in order to best help them through their interaction with gambling.
Thank you. I just want to go to the floor just because...
Well, before you do that, can I just come back on the
Yes.
tennis point? Or maybe we'll get a question on it. If we don't get a question on it, I'll come
Okay,
back
we'll
on
see.
it.
So one of the things we've definitely got a question there. In the meantime, I still challenge the premise that if betting was so popular, why is 60% or so of the Premier League football clubs all sponsored by betting companies on their shirts if people naturally wanted to do it? That assumption, I just think, I'm not sure it's stand up to that much scrutiny.
But again, this is again a part of what you've got to understand about the way that the betting market works. You don't have a global set of legislation and rules that apply. Yeah. And so, in actual fact, what you've got to look is there's a sport there that is incredibly popular, and having sponsorship on the shirts allows you to advertise and to access markets that you may not be able to advertise indirectly. So a lot of this, when you actually watch I'm not going to talk about the Premier League. When you watch a sports event and you see, different language, perimeter advertising or sport or shirt sponsorship, that isn't for the guys in the stadium. It might not even be for the domestic audience. That is about being able to advertise in areas where there just isn't the legislation to be able to allow betting in those territories. And this is the problem. We're looking at a patchwork quilt of legislation, regulation, and enforcement. And sports just aren't equipped to actually understand and address this.
Well, look, I want to come back to you on that legal framework because I think that's super interesting. Thanks for the answer on that. Name and organisation, please.
It's David Murray, Fosmaz and Shoesmiths. My kids, who are 12 and 10, play a lot of cricket, and there's an app which you probably or may not know about called playcricket.com, whereby scoring of cricket matches at any level is done on an iPad and is instantly uploaded effectively to the world. I imagine there's loads more of those kind of devices and apps, and they'll only get more and more popular. Where do you, and I don't know the answer to this, but A, how does that impact integrity going forward when you can have kids' sport at any level being instantly available around the world? And B, what's the implication for the data companies when you've effectively got user-generated data as opposed to data being gathered by bigger companies?
So I think
this is exactly the point.
Go Dave first, then you. I think is that right?
Yeah, we'll probably say something very similar, which is it comes back to the point about quality control and data quality. And the reality is no bookmaker worth his salt is going to take a crowdsourced kid on an iPad as a basis for offering financial transactions, basically, i.e. bets on that sport. And that's, crowdsourcing is a really interesting topic, I think, for the way in which the market for data outside of the betting industry can develop in the future. But in terms of the quality control, all of the integrity measures that we talked about earlier in relation to making sure that data can be relied upon for a financial transaction in the same way as it might be in a financial market, is not going to arrive through somebody tapping an iPad at a kid's football game. And for that reason, I think it will be some time before that risk exists. But that risk does exist if there's a demand for betting on a sport and there isn't a service provision which comes from companies such as ours who provide that quality control and all of those checks and balances. And those are the things that our customers are interested in when they're taking our data. Our data and the success of our companies has not been built up, or has only been built up, in fact, because of that quality control, that we're able to provide that, and our customers are able to rely upon it. And that actually, I can segue. Did you want to come on that, Matt?
By all means, finish.
No, I was only going to segue into the tennis point because, this does somehow address the tennis point as well. And, backing up what Stephen said, there is this very significant global betting market on tennis. It has been around for a long time. And the ITF made a decision back in 2012 to actually engage in that proper and formalized process of having a structured relationship with the betting market and having a structured deal with an official data provider. The tennis betting market is now roughly worth about 10% of the regulated market worldwide, and the ITF makes up about 25% of that 10%. So it's a significant part of the global betting market, and it would be naively optimistic, I think, of the words of one of the experts in this space. It would be naively optimistic to think that just because there wasn't a deal between the ITF and Sportradar, or indeed any of these other guys who bid for that deal at the time, that suddenly that betting market would disappear, or in fact that there would be any integrity benefits to the sport by taking that official data provision away. So those things are, actually intrinsically linked.
So we've got another question up there, but do you want to, while we go to the gentleman, can we put your hand up so you can see what, yeah, brilliant, thanks. Matt, did you want to add anything to that? Sorry.
Not at this stage, we'll come back. I think David expressed that very clearly.
You can get the first response next.
It's a slightly similar question.
So it's a name organisation, please.
So, Henry Milas from the PA. Coming from this from a sort of a horse racing and a dog racing perspective, we talked about the quality, the integrity of the data that's actually being collected, and this is coming from an official and unofficial data perspective. There are data providers out there who are providing quality unofficial data. What is the damage really to the bookmakers taking that unofficial data? Because the only real damage that's easy to see is to the rights holders who are losing out commercially, but actually the quality is as good, in many cases down to a bit of human error perhaps, as the official data.
Thank you. Matt?
And as you said, it's materially the same point. Obviously, there's a conversation around official, unofficial, and how that kind of evolves. That can be quite a complicated discussion. But if you start with the basis that you're providing data into a betting operator, that betting operator wants to create the most engaging sports betting environment it can for customers so that they go to that betting operator in order to engage with betting. Second, they want to be able to do so in a way which minimises any level of risk. And that's the kind of the betting operator mindset. So all of the controls and the things that we talked about before, and David and I and Stephen as well will reiterate as vitally important, are about minimising that risk. In minimising that risk, they also allow betting operators to leave markets open for longer and to have larger limits on what people may be able to bet, obviously subject to the other controls that people have when they sign up to use a betting account. But materially, it's about creating a better environment for someone to go and enjoy a betting opportunity in a responsible way, and of course subject to all of the other regulations.
That's the bit I don't understand, because if you listen to...
My point there is that that's not the subject of this panel.
I think it's related, though.
Well, of course it's related, but it's we can do another panel where we have a conversation about that happily. But that's the kind of premise of what we're trying to create. And as I said, I think the challenge for our business and industry now is to make that an even stronger proposition in order the quality of that be promoted very significantly. Now, when you then get into unofficial and official, then it's a market again which is evolving very quickly. There are rights holders who have very, very strong propositions on an official basis, and often, when utilised correctly, that is the best way to go around creating that quality of product, because you have things like better access to stadia, better access to connectivity in that stadia, and so on and so forth, and often having, although usually much less than other people would necessarily consider, having that official relationship has significant benefits. And the official market is growing and developing, but it's another piece where we have a job, and rights holders have a job, and operators have a job to work together to find a balance whereby the commercials frameworks that surround that relationship work in such a way that at a sensible price point you can create that best quality product in a way whereby rights holders will see a return. There is an actual benefit to having a rights holder relationship. It promotes the integrity of the content that's being created and how it's being utilised, and it creates a better and safer betting environment for people who want to participate in betting. And in a sort of nutshell, that's the official environment. There are still plenty of unofficial deals out there, but over time, I would be surprised if the market didn't evolve considerably towards a more official framework generally.
Okay, did you add anything to add or not?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would add a couple of points, actually. I mean, I think we, as data companies, actually should be more honest about the answer to this question. I think it's a great question. Because the reality is that we all provide some official data, and we also all provide unofficial data. I think some of us are more open about that than others. I would say Sportradar is more open about that than probably anyone else. But that is the reality. And the points that we were making earlier, and I was making earlier about quality of the back-end protection that you can provide. But the reality is that between unofficial and official, there is really often only a stamp of approval from a particular rights holder. As Matt said, there may be some access benefits or whatever else. But there should be, and I think it's healthy that there is competition in that market. And this also comes back to a really fundamental point about this market as a whole, which is probably interesting for the lawyers in the room, which is about actually, okay, fundamentally, what protections does data have, sports data have from a legal perspective? Because the very starting point of this whole debate is actually that sports data does not have any IP. Inherently, it does not have any IP protection. So the ability for all of us to make a business out of collecting and aggregating sports data, I would say, is actually quite a delicate balance, because there isn't any inherent protection in that IP. And what that means is that we can collect it in a certain way, but in reality, if we invest in, so the point that Matt was also alluding to, if we're making decisions about investing with a rights holder into their official data their official data partner, what do we get back in return? Because in reality, all of our competitors potentially can collect the same data without making that investment. They can collect it from broadcast completely legitimately. Potentially they can go to venue and collect it, unless there is a really complex set of checks and balances to try to prevent that from happening. And even then, if they're doing an official data setup as an exclusive deal, you open up competition law issues around monopolization of information, effectively monopolization of data. So, I think from a legal perspective, I think it's a really interesting topic. We are very open about the fact that actually there is a market for official and unofficial. We supply both of those markets. Where we have official deals, these guys provide unofficial data for those, in those sports. We have an official data deal with the NBA. These guys provide NBA data. Every match is broadcast. So our ability to make a business out of that is based upon the, maybe 6 to 10 seconds latency advantage that we have before they can collect the data from a broadcast feed. It's a really tough business, right? So, but I think it's critical to understanding how we interact with the rights holders, because our position is not one of, I guess, kind of some sort of strident approach in relation to the fact we don't want to invest, but we have to operate as a business, and it's a natural commercial instinct that we're only going to invest where we think actually there is a value that we can invest in and that we can extract, not only for our business, but also for the rights holders ultimately.
I think
from a rights holder's perspective, and I'm very glad that David has talked about the official and the unofficial positions that the data companies have in various different sports, because I think that's one of the things that, as a sports right holder, you go, okay, you may be helping me in integrity in this space, and you've access to data, are you then utilizing it in an unofficial space? And so sports rights holders legitimately are going to want to put checks and balances in place, and that comes down to the relationship that they have with the data company and the contractual arrangements. But I think equally it's important that sports, and it's an evolution, and it's constantly evolving. But sports have to get on board as well with the practical realities of the importance of data, the value it can bring, and the fact that you do need conduits in order to get it to market in the best way. And for that, you need honest relations and you need transparency. And some days you'll do a deal with David's companies, other days it'll be with Matt's or Stephen's. It will depend, and that's just normal tendering processes. But I think we've evolved, the market has evolved, and sport needs to ensure that it evolves with it, or it will get left behind.
This market just isn't, there's a kind of a perception this market is fully developed and mature, and it really isn't. We are seeing enormous developments in technology, in the legal framework, so it is a bit of a movable feast. I think if I kind of, I completely agree, and I understand the issue about having exclusive, non-exclusive, official, unofficial. Still, the vast majority of sports, though, are not engaging. The vast majority of sports aren't providing official data. Most sports don't even collect their own data. Let's be honest about it. They don't collect, certainly not data that would be capable of powering the needs of the sports books. And so I think the market's got a lot of maturing to do, and the bit that I think we need to get to eventually is where we have a relationship that works well on integrity, commercial, that benefits all the stakeholders, the betting operators, the people that want to bet, the sports, the athletes, and that's the framework we'll ultimately end up with. But we're a long way from that now.
And then we've got a question, I think.
We're all using the term
questions.
evolution a lot, and I think that's right, because as you said, it is definitely not a fully mature market. And I have a suspicion that in time we might end up sort of looking back at this era and thinking it was almost quite a quaint debate around, official in stadia, collecting off TV and all this sort of stuff, because I suspect what will happen is you'll move towards a position where the official data, rights holder permitted, will have evolved to such a degree that the nature of the data you're able to collect under that badge and with those rights is of such quality or superior to what else you might be able to collect, such that the value will be inherent in the same way that it is very clear in other rights relationships, in the broadcast space or elsewhere. Data is an anomaly in this respect, because you can somewhat materially match unofficially what you can do officially. So I think in time it will become a bit of a quaint debate, this whole piece. But we're lucky at Perform, because we're a slightly different business to these guys here. Obviously we have a very significant betting content business, but we sort of sit in a different place in the value chain, because we've got one of the biggest sports broadcasters in the world. We've got a huge media division as well. We do broadcast distribution, and we have this content vertical, part of which is betting. So we're very fortunate, because when we go and speak to rights holders, we're talking to them about everything along that pathway, from broadcast rights through to what we might be able to do in terms of digital platforms. And betting is a part of what we're able to deliver with rights holders. So our focus, I think, we have a quality of product which does, as I described before, a very good job for betting operators, and we're very pleased with those relationships we have. But we also have a huge alignment with rights holders across the board. And we're continually trying to work with them and build that bridge and liaison between rights holders and the betting space, so that we can create the best possible product. And we're able to do that because we have a seat at the table with rights holders in many capacities. I think it's been a considerable advantage to us, and has allowed us to have that, I guess, slightly elevated view of what this market for data could be in time.
So I know I've got it. Yeah, thanks. I know there's a bunch of questions. It's not fair on other speakers. Also, I've got to keep an eye on the time. So just to guys, we've got about another 5 minutes or so, depending on how engaged everyone, how hungry people are. But I can't cut everyone else off. And then on the panel that I'm doing, let it overrun. It'd be outrageous. Name and organisation, please.
Phil Draper from the Football Association of Wales. So it was discussed earlier that the majority of these issues with regards to match fixing arise at a lower level, so a lower standard in the sport. And it was also discussed that education could be a way of combating this. To put that into context, there's betting markets at tier 2 of Welsh football. Now that is a completely amateur league. You can't even receive a wage, you can only receive expenses. So the majority of players will receive £20 to £40 for petrol to training into games. Now, for there to be a betting market there can't be much data that can be exported. I personally would argue that it's the betting companies themselves that are creating a lot of integrity issues, because they're going further and further down the line, obviously, to make more money. Would you not argue that a way to deal with that would be to draw a line at a certain standard, and it would therefore be easier to monitor?
In an ideal world, I agree, but who's going to implement that? So let's just say that you could do that, and you said you would go to the Gambling Commission in the UK, and they agreed. So you couldn't get a license if you do that, and that's kind of great. And then you go to the next regulated market. But there's an awful lot where there just isn't any regulation. There's an awful lot of operators that are, unregulated, that are working out of territories where you just wouldn't be able to impose those. You wouldn't be able to impose those sort of restrictions. And there isn't this idea that I was talking about before about the framework of regulation and licensing is a patchwork quilt. And so what would end up happening is the guys that are based in the UK would abide by the terms of the Gambling Commission license, and those that are based outside of the UK, maybe their regulators don't adopt that offering, that level. And the next thing that happens is they then offer that betting, and they can, because you can offer it online or on mobile, that will be offered into UK punters, and therefore then there will be a pushback, because essentially the business will shift. I'm not saying I have any of the answers for this. I mean, I think that some of it comes down to us acting in a responsible way. You know, we don't offer betting on youth competitions. Before we offer any, or we don't offer betting, we don't offer data for betting on those competitions. Before we offer any particular league or match, we'll do an integrity assessment to see whether actually it's right and proper to offer that into the betting markets. And in some cases, we could make money offering some of these events into the betting market, but we don't do so because we don't think it's right. So I think some of it is about us being responsible and self-regulating, and the sort of things you're talking about would be great. I just don't see a way of implementing that on a worldwide basis right at the moment, and that's the bit where I think you need to be, you need to take different types of steps, because I just don't think there's an ability to impose a license or a law on a universal basis, unfortunately.
So it's a quick response then. Should you cut off?
Yeah, can I come in quickly?
We need to get this quick because we've run
Yeah.
out of time and there's some questions.
Quick fire answer in which case.
Yeah.
So two quick points. I think, the response to that is, okay, who draws the line and how does it get policed? Because to Stephen's point, it's very difficult. So the reality is that the only way, my view is the only way that you can achieve that sort of outcome is actually by the sports, the data companies, and the betting operators working together, collaborating, and potentially finding an agreement on where that line should be drawn. I think that's very difficult, but I think that's the only way that it can happen. One other quick point, which also comes back to the tennis point earlier. I don't want to be oversimplistic, and I don't want anyone in here to go away with an oversimplistic view of what the drivers are for integrity risk in sport, because the pay or the ability for the players and the athletes to earn a living is only one of many, many factors. So in reality, and going back to the tennis integrity report, which a lot of the focus, the report started or came about as a result of a.
Well, this was a quick one.
It is quick. But the report started. It came about because there was a BBC report about 16 top 50 players supposedly being involved in match fixing. The outcome of the report was a focus of attention on the bottom end of the sport, because there's a huge volume of matches that happen at the bottom end of the sport. But the reality in terms of the propensity or the likelihood of a match being fixed is actually in the middle. It's at the ATP level, ATP Tour, and ATP Challenge level. That's where it's most likely to happen. And those guys are earning much more money than the guys on the lower level. So it isn't just about money, it's also critically about the size of that market. So the ability to place bets. What's driving match fixers? What is driving the people who are fixing these matches? It's a profit motive, right? They want to make the most money. And they will not make the most money betting on a tiny sport where they can probably only put a maximum €50 bet on. And they've got to go to all of the trouble of organising a match. So there is a scale issue here, and actually what you find is that it is the meeting point of a number of different factors, but athlete remuneration is only one of those factors.
Thank you. Sorry, I know you guys wanted to respond, but we've got a couple of questions and we've got very short
Matt.
time. Yeah, I'll go one and then you. So, name, organisation, please.
Yeah, I'm a Morgan Sports Law. My question, I guess, related to the ethical side of things, and I know you say it might be another panel discussion, but we all know there's a darker side to the gambling issue, and there's a huge problem at the moment with gambling addiction. My question then was, how can the data be used to try protect consumers and the fans of a sport almost from themselves and almost from the industry? And how are the commercial stakeholders working towards, making it a safer place so people don't get into massive problems with debt, and whether from Susan's perspective, whether the governing bodies feel this is something that is their responsibility in terms of not allowing the industry to almost be completely commercially and focused.
Thank you. So Susan, do you want to go first on that point? And then
Absolutely, and great question. I'm really glad you raised the issue of addiction, because I think it may have been beyond the scope of this particular panel, but it is integral to where we will end up, and it has to be considered as part of the integrity piece. And I think that starts with education. When you're educating the players about A, not gambling on their own sport, and B, the dangers of gambling, and then also putting in place systems whereby if someone does end up in a situation where they're in difficulty, that they have somewhere to go, so that that can be helped. And that's as much a societal problem as it is a sports problem. So I think sport has a part to play. I think all parties, I mean, we've discussed where the overlap between all of these bodies are, and that's in the integrity space. I think that fits in there and should be part of that ongoing discussion and not ignored.
Can I get really quick responses just because I'm going to get in trouble with the catering staff.
I'll defend sports a bit here and say, actually, I'm not convinced that particular issue is a direct responsibility of sports. I think sports already get tasked with a huge amount of responsibility in this area, and I would say that one actually is firmly with the regulators and the betting companies themselves. And that's actually in the UK, under the UK Gambling Commission, there are already really significant responsibilities that those companies have, and they're already using technology, actually facial recognition technology, to try to identify gamblers who have self-identified, as you say, to say I've got a problem, to prevent them from being able to place a future bet.
I agree entirely with both Susan and David on that. The thing I'll say is, and it returns to my theme from the very start of this, is we are in the middle of a revolution and a maturation of this industry. Over time, we will get to the point where the betting market has evolved, the products are engaging better, safer, better utilised and created, such that your point about lower league Welsh games may well become moot because there'll be no interest in people betting on them because they'll be betting on a better product in a deeper way from another sport. And likewise, issues that we're dealing with, or the bits that we can control in that respect, are about quality of content and product, such that it minimises the risk to the extent that we can control, obviously within the other regulatory framework. I think the industry will mature and grow into something where it naturally creates a safer and better environment for people to bet, and where some of those risks are mitigated.
I just got 15 point. No.
Of course, 50-page document. Next question, so behind. Whilst I was just going to say one thing to add to that, though, there's now been, which I don't want to still funded for the next panel, but over-the-top regulation on gambling in Australia. So Australia's ahead of us. We're waiting on some decision from, I believe, the Gambling Commission. Is that right? I'm looking at Kevin. There's a nod. I think the Gambling Commission and the UK government are looking at betting advertising and regulating, particularly digitally, because it hasn't been very well policed, if at all, at the moment. So that's something we might see a shift. So name organisation, please.
Warren Fellows from K&L Gates. The suggestion Australia is ahead of us is an interesting one. Firstly, just very quickly, the panel have been astonishing, a really, really fantastic job and insight, and I don't think we're going away with any simplistic views on things. I was going to ask questions around technology, the US market, we just haven't got time to answer them, particularly blockchain technology and its impact for integrity. I also think that there is a lot of illegality in relation to sport around media piracy, around sponsorship, ambush marketing and betting. But probably at the moment, because of the lack of engagement relatively, there isn't the value in it for the sport, so there isn't the funding that is put to tackle the ill. Also, betting is a little more heinous because it does corrupt the honestness and fairness and integrity of the actual product, the competition, the match itself, rather than the other two. The two areas I was fascinated hearing a
Sorry, Warren. So what's
an
the
exposition from? No, you can be quiet. Say for 2 days.
There's a question coming.
No. Well, it was around. So imagine I've got a young son, say who's 16 or daughter, who's brilliant. She or he is getting all the education in the world about this is what can happen, this is how it happened. She goes to an international tournament to play some tennis, and she's approached by part of an organised crime syndicate. And what they use is, I'm sure you know, they will use approaches of seduction, not in that sense, but in seduction. Then it will lead to suggestion about how you might corrupt the
Warren, I'm going to have to move you on.
And if you don't comply, it will lead to threats. So there's a process from the education, but then how is that person, they might be educated, a 16, 18-year-old, they might be educated, but who do they report to? What's the lines to actually protect them beyond the education process.
Well, Warren, I
And
think in a Rugby World Cup context, there were liaison officers attached to every team. And so if that happened, they had an immediate ability to go and say, I've been approached to those persons. So there are ways and means of doing it and mechanisms. And in a tournament context, a sport can manage that.
And if I can quickly answer on
that has failed though in the past. There must be other approach other than, because you're approached like in your hotel, and there you can imagine what the criminal would say.
I think that's the same. To be fair though, but in integrity across the board, whether it's anti-doping, whether it's a safeguarding, we'll hear later more broadly. And that's actually probably a better discussion for the safeguarding panel. To be honest with you, on that kind, I know what's coming to a degree.
And then I was going to come on to.
But I think it's a susceptibility point, and this is where sports do have a responsibility to put in place support and investigation and mechanisms to safeguard those parts of their integrity
and
program.
Enforce it.
And to use the and to
I was going to come on to enforcement.
So
get
the microphone
between the police, prosecutors and sport.
But to go, you use tennis as an example, and just very quickly, because this comes back to the integrity review. For me at least, the reason why tennis has experienced some of the challenges that led to the integrity review are because actually they did not move as fast as the market has moved on their sport. And so the market has developed on tennis betting in a remarkable way over the last 10 years. It developed before they did the official data deals. It carried on developing apace. And their response in terms of the integrity setup for that sport, which was, they were at the forefront of putting in place a global integrity unit, tennis integrity unit in 2009, pretty much before any other sport had done something like that. But then the pace with which that changed to where we are now in 2018, tennis still has more or less the same infrastructure. They've added a bit of resource over the last couple of years, but more or less the same infrastructure. And it is not capable as it currently stands to deal with some of those challenges.
And the frightening thing is if you take where tennis is now, even if you accept that it is not fit for purpose, even if you admit that it hasn't kept pace, it's still light years ahead of what other sports are actually doing in this space. That's the frightening thing.
Absolutely.
Is the fact that tennis actually invested an awful lot of time in its structures, its procedures. I'm not saying they've got everything right, but if you take them and you say that isn't good enough, and then look at all the other sports, a lot of them fall well short of that.
I think that's a great point to end on, and I think it is one of the challenges in the broader integrity space that if you do something positive, sometimes it can come back. It seems to be that you get punished for it, even if you are being progressive. Warren, I know we're friends, so it's all right. I can cut you off.
Sean, rather than end on a negative note for sport, I think we also need to have a balance about how you help sport, and I think bringing economics into the discussion is important, and levies or other integrity fees and so on have to be part of the debate.
Yeah,
so we didn't get time. I'm going to have to shut off because this is going to go on for another 2 hours. The kitchen staff are going to kill me because the food's all cold, so apologies. I hope they managed to keep it warm. I think you agree. We could have talked about this for another couple of hours easily and still not really scratch the surface. Some excellent questions. I think they'll come up later on. I wanted to get everyone's view. Maybe if you're willing to engage with me, should there be a federal or state approach to regulation of sports betting in the US?
Oh, sorry, I thought we'd finished.
Switched off. Yeah, he was like, he's still talking.
Well, unfortunately, I don't get to make that decision. I think there are lots of people who would suggest that.
Federal or state?
Would be
federal or state, just quickly.
Would be preferable, but it doesn't appear that there's any reality of that actually taking place.
What is wrong with lawyers? No, federal or state, though, do you think it's more complex? You can say that in more nuance, then I take it.
I think the preference is federal.
I agree.
Yep, but from an integrity perspective, thank you. Federal is brilliant, has significant advantages, but the reality we know is something different.
No, I think you agree. It's a fantastic panel. Thank you so much.